The North Sea churns black beneath a moonless sky. April the 23rd, 1918. Somewhere in the darkness between England and occupied Belgium, 76 vessels slice through the waves in absolute silence. No lights pierce the void. No wireless signals portray their positions. Only the muffled throb of engines and the hiss of water against steel hulls mark their passage through the night. Aboard these ships, 4,000 men check their weapons for the final time. Royal Marines adjust the straps on their webbing, feeling the weight of Mills bombs against their ribs. Naval ratings stand at their posts, hands slick with cold sweat despite the chill. In the bows of 3 old cruisers, skeleton crews prepare seacocks for rapid flooding, knowing their orders demand they sink their own ships before dawn. And deep within a submarine's cramped hull, 5 tons of explosives tick away the minutes. The wind shifts. Salt spray mingles with coal smoke from the destroyer's funnels. Some men taste fear, metallic and sharp at the back of their throats. Others feel only the strange emptiness that comes when fate has already been accepted. Every volunteer knew the arithmetic when signing on. The operation required total surprise, overwhelming violence, and the willingness to accept casualties that peacetime navies would call catastrophic. Through the darkness ahead lies a concrete fortress jutting into the sea, a 1.5-mile curved mole protecting the most dangerous submarine base in German hands. Behind its massive breakwater, U-boats slip out nightly to prowl the shipping lanes, strangling Britain's lifelines. For 4 years now, this harbour has been untouchable. Tonight, that changes. The British Empire is about to hurl itself against reinforced concrete and hardened steel in one of the most audacious gambles in naval history. What drove Britain to this brink? Why did volunteers accept what many believed to be a one-way mission? What happened when this ghost fleet reached the fortress at Zeebrugge? And why does this night still echo through military history? You're listening to The Crow's Tales, and this is the Night Raid at Zeebrugge. The Western Front in early 1918 reeked of desperation. For nearly 4 years, the armies of Europe had been locked in a death grip that neither side could break. The war that began with cavalry charges and dreams of quick victory had devolved into industrialized slaughter on an unprecedented scale. The Somme, Verdun, Passchendaele, names that would forever conjure images of mud, wire, and rotten corpses. Millions had died for gains measured in yards. The front line, stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland, had barely moved since 1914, a suppurating wound across the face of Europe that consumed men faster than nations could feed them into the trenches. Now, Germany's spring offensive had finally broken the stalemate, smashing through British lines with terrifying momentum. But the crisis ran deeper than maps could show. Beneath the waves of the English Channel and the North Sea, a silent stranglehold tightened around Britain's throat. U-boats. These submarines slipped out from their bases along the Belgian coast like wolves, hunting merchant vessels with ruthless efficiency. By April 1918, they were sinking ships faster than Britain could replace them. The mathematics were brutal. Britain imported 2/3 of its food. Without merchant ships, the nation had 6 weeks of supplies remaining. The Grand Fleet sat impotent while submarines costing a fraction of a battleship brought the empire to its knees. The nexus of this underwater threat lay in occupied Belgium, where German ingenuity had transformed the port of Bruges into an invisible fortress. The city sat 8 miles inland, connected to the sea by canals emerging at Ostend and Zeebrugge. U-boats could shelter in Bruges, absolutely safe from naval bombardment, then slip out through the canals under darkness. By dawn, they'd be hunting in the shipping lanes. Zeebrugge had been transformed into a concrete leviathan. The Germans had built a massive curved mole, 1.5 miles of reinforced concrete extending into the sea. Along this fortification, they positioned heavy artillery batteries, machine gun nests, and searchlight positions. The mole stood 30 feet above the waterline, its seaward wall a sheer concrete cliff. Behind it, the canal entrance gaped like a mouth, disgorging U-boats with mechanical regularity. The Royal Navy had tried everything. They bombarded the coast, but achieved nothing permanent. Aircraft dropped bombs through anti-aircraft fire, but the tonnage was insufficient. Every conventional solution had failed. Enter Vice Admiral Roger Keyes, appointed to command the Dover Patrol in January 1918. Within weeks, he conceived a solution so audacious the Admiralty initially rejected it as fantasy. If the canal couldn't be destroyed from the outside, British forces could storm the mole like a medieval castle, silence its guns, then sink block ships directly in the canal mouth. 3 obsolete cruisers, Thetis, Intrepid and Iphigenia, would be converted into block ships, their holds filled with concrete rubble to ensure they'd sink quickly and permanently. Motor launches would shadow them, waiting to dash in and rescue the skeleton crews after the ships were scuttled. Once scuttled in the canal entrance, their hulks would create an impassable barrier, trapping the U-boats in Bruges and eliminating the threat as its source. HMS Vindictive, a cruiser dating from 1897, would be transformed into an assault ship. Fitted with special gangways and grappling hooks, she would ram the mole itself, and Royal Marines would spill out directly onto the fortification. 2 Mersey ferries, Iris and Daffodil, would support the assault. The plan's brutal logic was inescapable. The mole's batteries commanded every yard of the approach to the canal entrance. 6-inch guns with pre-registered firing solutions that could obliterate any ship attempting to enter. The block ships would be under direct fire at point-blank range for the full length of their run. They needed chaos on the mole, German gunners fighting for their lives rather than calmly tracking targets. Vindictive's assault parties would have to storm the fortification and create that chaos, turning the mole into a close-quarters battlefield. Every Marine crossing those gangways would be buying time with blood. Even if they failed to destroy a single gun emplacement, their presence would force the defenders to turn their weapons inward, giving the block ships precious minutes to reach the canal. It was a diversion and an assault combined. Neither component would succeed without the other. Most audaciously, submarine C3 would be packed with 5 tons of explosives and driven into the viaduct connecting the mole to shore. Destroying this railway bridge would trap the German defenders, preventing reinforcements from reaching them once the assault began. The call for volunteers produced scenes impossible in war-weary Britain. When Keyes asked for men to crew the block ships, missions everyone understood meant probable death, entire crews stepped forward. Marines who had survived the Somme competed for places on what many called a death or glory operation. In the workshops at Chatham, welders worked around the clock fitting Vindictive with a false deck, mounting flamethrowers and mortars in her fighting tops, installing the specially designed gangways that would, in theory, allow men to storm directly onto the mole's parapet. Every modification was experimental. On the afternoon of April 22nd, the assault force departed the Thames estuary. They needed to reach Zeebrugge at high tide, in darkness, with wind carrying their smokescreen. The formation that took shape defied naval wisdom. Vindictive leading, block ships behind, tiny Mersey ferries maintaining station, destroyers weaving protective screens. As darkness fell, all lights were extinguished. Navigation became following phosphorescent wakes against marginally lighter sky. Below decks, assault parties made final preparations. Marines blackened bayonets with soot. Demolition teams checked charges wrapped in waterproof canvas. In Vindictive sickbay, surgical instruments were laid in neat rows. At 2200 hours, motor launches surged ahead, laying smoke floats. The chemical smoke, thick and acrid, rolled across the water in billowing clouds. Men wrapped wet cloths around their faces as smoke enveloped them, turning the world into choking blindness. At 2340 hours, star shells burst overhead. The Germans had detected something. The shells hung like malevolent suns, turning smoke into luminous walls. Then came ranging shots, water spouts erupting between vessels. All of a sudden, the wind shifted. The commander of Vindictive, Captain Alfred Carpenter, stood on its bridge and felt the change instantly. A cold gust from the northwest that shouldn't have been there. His fingers tightened involuntarily on the bridge's rail, as he watched the smokescreen begin to tear apart. Ragged holes opening like wounds. Through one gap, a searchlight beam stabbed out from the shore, sweeping across the water with mechanical precision until it found them. The light hit Vindictive's bridge like a physical blow. Carpenter's night vision vanished in an instant of searing whiteness. His eyes streamed tears, blinking away purple after-images. His hands found the engine telegraph by muscle memory, slamming it forward. The deck plates beneath his feet began to vibrate more violently as the ancient engines strained. Maximum speed. There was no hiding now. A shell struck too close for comfort. The concussion travelled through the ship's frame and up through Carpenter's boots. A sharp jolt that made his teeth click together. He tasted copper. He'd bitten his tongue. Another explosion, closer. Shrapnel rang against the bridge armour like hammered steel. The helmsman beside him grunted and slumped forward onto the wheel. Carpenter lunged for it, his hand slipping in something wet and warm on the spokes. He held the wheel steady while gesturing frantically for a replacement, feeling the ship fight him as she picked up speed. Vindictive was overloaded, top-heavy with modifications. She rolled sickeningly with each swell, wanting to fall off course. Through the shattered bridge windows, he could see the mole now, a black mass against a flame-lit sky. 500 yards. Machine gun fire began to sweep the deck, streams of tracer rounds creating lines of light. He heard impacts on the false deck now, sharp metallic strikes that meant men were dying. The specially fitted gangways were taking hits. If they were destroyed before reaching the mole, the entire mission would fail. 400 yards, 300. At this range, Carpenter could see individual muzzle flashes along the mole's parapet. An explosion forward sent a column of water over the bow. Salt spray mixed with cordite smoke filled his nostrils. His hands trembled on the wheel. He gripped harder to stop them, knuckles white, the tendons in his forearms standing out like cables. 200 yards. The planned docking point was passing to starboard, but damaged steering meant that he couldn't correct without losing speed. Behind him, the voice tube from the engine room screeched, something about pressure dropping. Temperatures critical. He ignored it. They would reach the mole or they would die. No other options existed. 100 yards. The mole loomed enormous, its concrete face lit by continuous gunfire. Carpenter could see German soldiers running along the parapet. A shell struck the foretop and Vindictive lurched. Metal fragments whined past his head, one taking a chunk from the wooden wheel rim inches from his hand. The replacement helmsman appeared beside him now, blood running from a scalp wound, helping hold course. 50 yards. He could make out individual features on the German defenders' faces in the gun flashes. Time dilated. He noticed absurd details. A German officer's mouth open in what must have been a shout. A seagull somehow still perched on a lamppost, untouched by the chaos. His breathing had become shallow, rapid. He forced himself to take one deep breath, steadying himself for impact. Carpenter pulled the engine telegraph to full astern, knowing it was too late to matter. The engineers below would understand. Vindictive struck the mole at 12 knots. The impact threw him forward against the wheel, driving the air from his lungs. He heard the grinding shriek of steel against concrete, felt the entire ship shudder and list. The gangways were swinging out, grappling hooks flying across the gap. Marines were already moving towards them, rifle butts tight against shoulders. His hands, when he finally released the wheel, left bloody prints on the worn wood. Now, the real slaughter would begin. The moment Vindictive struck the mole, her specially designed gangway swung out into the darkness. They were supposed to hook onto the parapet and provide stable bridges for the assault parties. Instead, they flailed in the air, 30 feet above the surging water. The mole was higher than intelligence had indicated. Not by much, perhaps 6 feet, but enough to turn precision planning into desperate improvisation. The gangways crashed down, their hooks scraping and sparking against the concrete parapet before catching hold. Immediately, German machine guns found them. Bullets sparked off the metal railings and punched through the wooden decking. The gangways, already damaged during the approach, began to buckle under their own weight. Marines pressed forward anyway. packed shoulder to shoulder in the narrow companionways leading to the gangway entrances, feeling the deck vibrate with impacts. Daffodil, the little Mersey ferry, surged alongside Vindictive, her captain understanding instinctively what was needed. He drove his bow against Vindictive's stern, physically pushing the cruiser against the mole and holding her there with his engines at full power. The grinding of steel against concrete created a continuous shriek that cut through the gunfire. Iris attempted to grapple the mole directly, but couldn't get the purchase on the smooth concrete. Her crew threw scaling ladders against the wall. Most were shot away before anyone could climb them. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Harrison stood at the entrance to the forward gangway, watching the wooden planks ahead of him disintegrate under machine gun fire. The gangway stretched out like a bridge over hell, 30 feet of splintering wood swaying with Vindictive's roll, lit by muzzle flashes and the burning debris that German defenders were hurling down. He could see the parapet where he needed to get his men, could see the German helmets moving behind the concrete lip. The gap might as well have been a mile. Harrison's breathing became quick and shallow through his nose, his mouth too dry to swallow. The Webley revolver in his right hand felt impossibly heavy. His left hand gripped the gangway's rail, and he could feel every impact transmitted through the metal. Each bullet strike a small sharp vibration against his palm. Behind him, his Marines pressed close, their bodies a wall of heat and controlled violence waiting to be unleashed. He could smell their sweat, the oil on their rifles, the wet wool of their uniforms. The gangway lurched. One of its support cables had been shot through. Harrison felt his stomach drop as the entire structure sagged, then caught again with a jolt that nearly threw him off his feet. Through the gaps in the damaged decking, he could see the water churning white between ship and mole, littered with debris and the floating bodies of men who have already tried and failed. Harrison moved forward. Not a charge, the gangway was too damaged, too unstable for running. He placed each boot carefully on the remaining solid planks while machine gun rounds cracked past his head. 10 feet, 20. A Marine behind him gasped and fell, his weight making the gangway sway sickeningly. Harrison didn't look back. The parapet was so close now he could see the expressions on German faces. Young men, terrified and determined, working their weapons with mechanical efficiency. A stick grenade arced toward him through the air. Harrison saw it spinning, trailing sparks, and had just enough time to press himself flat before it exploded. Shrapnel tore through his left shoulder, a burning line of pain that made his arm go numb. He pushed himself up with his right hand, still gripping the revolver, and continued forward. Behind him, his Marines were following, firing their rifles from the hip as they advanced. The muzzle flashes were creating a strobe effect that turned everything into frozen moments. A German soldier's face contorting as bullets struck home, a Marine pitching sideways off the gangway, another Marine stepping over his body without hesitation. Harrison reached the end of the gangway. The parapet was still 4 feet above him, an impossible height with his wounded shoulder. He holstered his revolver, grabbed the concrete edge with his good hand, and tried to pull himself up. Then, a German rifle barrel appeared above him. He saw the muzzle flash, but never heard the shot. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Harrison fell backwards off the gangway, his body striking the water between the Vindictive and the Mole. He had been the first to attempt the crossing, holding the gangway long enough for others to follow. Within minutes, 2 more officers would die in the same spot. But the Marines kept coming, using their dead comrades' bodies as stepping stones, finally establishing a foothold in the parapet through sheer weight of numbers and sacrifice. The Marines and Bluejackets who made it onto the Mole found themselves in a concrete killing ground. The Mole's surface was over 100 yards wide, crisscrossed with railway tracks, scattered with cranes and cargo handling equipment that provided the only cover. German strongpoints had been built at regular intervals, reinforced concrete pillboxes with interlocking fields of fire. The British demolition parties, tasked with destroying specific targets, discovered that their intelligence was fatally flawed. The submarine shelter they were supposed to destroy didn't exist. The guns they were meant to silence were in different positions. They were fighting and dying for objectives that weren't there. Still, they pressed forward, working in groups, using grenades to clear strongpoints, engaging in vicious close-quarter fighting in the darkness. The mole became a confusion of running figures, muzzle flashes, explosions. A demolition party managed to destroy several small guns near the lighthouse. Another group found their way to what they believed was a destroyer alongside the mole, throwing grenades down onto its deck, only to discover they were attacking a dredger. The planned 15-minute assault stretched to an hour. Vindictive sirens wailed the recall signal again and again, barely audible over the gunfire. Marines began falling back toward the gangways, carrying their wounded, still fighting a rearguard action as German reinforcements pressed forward. The withdrawal was as costly as the assault, men bunching up at the gangway entrances, silhouetted against the flames, perfect targets for German marksmen. While the assault on the mole raged, the 3 block ships and submarine C3 made their run towards the canal entrance. They had departed from their holding position when Vindictive engaged the mole, using the chaos and distraction of that assault to mask their approach. Thetis led, followed by Intrepid and Iphigenia, their holds filled with concrete, their scuttling charges already placed, skeleton crews at their posts. The canal entrance was only 150 feet wide, protected by a complex system of nets, booms, and defensive positions. The block ship crews knew they had to get deep into the canal before scuttling. Too early, and the Germans could simply dredge around them. Too late, and they might ground in shallow water where their halts would be ineffective. Thetis, pushing through the smoke and chaos, missed the canal entrance on her first approach. Her captain, blinded by searchlights and disorientated by the smoke, found himself heading straight for the mole itself. He ordered full astern, spinning the wheel desperately, trying to come around for another attempt. The delay was fatal. Every German gun that could bear concentrated on the stationary target. Shells tore through Thetis's hull. Her bridge was swept by machine gun fire, killing most of the command crew. She limped toward the canal entrance, struck the defensive nets and tangled herself hopelessly. Her surviving crew blew the scuttling charges anyway, sinking her across the entrance, but not deep enough inside to fully block it. Behind, Intrepid and Iphigenia had better luck. They could see where Thetis had made her sacrifice. Intrepid charged through the gap at full speed, her bow crushing through the remaining nets, shells striking her continuously. She made it 400 yards into the canal before her captain ordered the charges blown. The ship settled quickly, her concrete-filled hull grinding against the canal bottom, listing to port and effectively blocking 2/3 of the channel. Iphigenia followed immediately behind, her crew working in darkness, their ship already burning from multiple hits. They managed to position themselves alongside Intrepid before scuttling, the 2 ships forming a barrier that would require significant dredging to clear. The crews evacuated in small boats, rowing through water lit by burning oil and swept by machine gun fire. The survivors who reached the motor launches were pulled aboard under continuous fire, several rescue boats taking direct hits as they withdrew. Others, whose boats were swamped or shot to pieces, swam through the oil-slicked water until they drowned or were pulled from sea by British destroyers making high-speed rescue runs. Some, too wounded to swim or row, were left behind in the canal and captured by German forces arriving from the shore. Meanwhile, submarine C3 was making her solitary run at the viaduct connecting the mole to the shore. Inside the submarine's cramped hull, Lieutenant Richard Sanford stood at the periscope. though it was nearly useless in the darkness and smoke. The submarine's interior was a metal coffin barely 6 feet in diameter, every surface sweating condensation, the air thick with diesel fumes and fierce sweat. 5 tons of explosives filled the forward compartment, the fuses already connected to a delay timer that Sanford would activate manually. He could hear shells striking the water nearby, dull, heavy sounds transmitted through the hull like giant hammers striking a bell. His crew of 5 volunteers worked in absolute silence, each man at his station, knowing that any shell penetrating the hull would detonate their cargo instantly. The engine telegraph showed a head full, though their ancient diesel could barely manage 8 knots. Through the periscope, Sanford caught glimpses of the viaduct, a latticework of steel girders rising from the water. He had studied its construction for weeks, identifying the critical point where the explosive would do maximum damage. But now, in darkness with water splashing over the periscope lens, with his submarine bucking in the swell, precision was impossible. He would have only one chance. A star shell burst directly overhead, illuminating everything in harsh magnesium light. Sanford saw the viaduct clearly, 200 yards ahead, German soldiers visible on its walkway, pointing at his submarine. Machine gun fire began immediately, bullets striking the conning tower with sharp metallic rings. He gave the order to dive to periscope depth by hand signal. The submarine's nose dipped, water rushing over the hull. The machine gun fire stopped, but now they were nearly blind, racing toward a target they could barely see. At 50 yards, Sanford raised the periscope for one final look. The viaduct loomed enormous, its steel supports thick as tree trunks. He adjusted course slightly, lining up with what he hoped was the critical junction. 20 yards. 10. He could now see individual rivets in the steel. The impact threw everyone forward. C3's bow crumpled against the viaduct's support, wedging tight between 2 massive girders. The submarine's momentum carried her stern around, twisting the hull with a grinding shriek of metal. They were stuck fast, exactly as planned. Sanford activated the timer, 12 minutes, then ordered abandon ship. The escape plan had seemed simple in the briefing room. They would evacuate through the conning tower into a small motor skiff lashed to the submarine's deck. But now, with C3 twisted and partially submerged, the machine gun fire was resuming from the viaduct above. The skiff was barely accessible. The crew crawled out one by one while bullets sparked off the hull around them. The skiff's engine, soaked with spray, refused to start. They paddled desperately with their hands and a single oar, the submarine behind them with its cargo of death counting down. They were still too close when C3 detonated. The explosion lifted a column of water 300 feet into the air. The shockwave nearly swamped their tiny boat. When the spray cleared, a 60-foot section of the viaduct was simply gone, its twisted remains dropping into the sea. The mole was cut off from reinforcement. German troops on the surviving sections of the viaduct, recovering from the shock of the explosion, began firing at the small boat below. Machine gun rounds stitched across the water. Sanford was hit multiple times in the leg and torso, collapsing into the bottom of the skiff. 2 of his crew were also wounded. They drifted into the darkness, too weak to paddle, until a British motor launch found them an hour later, Sanford unconscious from blood loss. The recall signal from Vindictive's siren had been wailing for 10 minutes, barely audible over the continuous roar of gunfire. On the mole, surviving Marines and bluejackets began their fighting withdrawal, moving backward from strong point to strong point, still throwing grenades, still firing at shadows in the flame-lit darkness. The dead were left where they fell. The wounded who could walk supported those who couldn't. Those who couldn't be moved were given morphine and abandoned. There was no other choice. At the gangways, chaos threatened to turn into catastrophe. The forward gangway had partially collapsed, its wooden decks splintered and burning. Men bunched at the entrance, silhouetted against the flames as German machine gunners found their range. Bodies began piling up at the bottleneck. A sergeant major physically threw men onto the gangway one at a time, spacing them out to prevent the damaged structure from collapsing under the collective weight. The gangway swayed sickeningly with each step, sections of decking falling away into the churning water below. On Vindictive's deck, the medical stations were overwhelmed. Wounded lay in rows along the port side, medics performing triage with brutal efficiency. Those who might survive got morphine and rough bandages. Those who wouldn't got morphine alone. The ship's chaplain moved among them, holding hands, closing eyes. Blood ran in streams across the deck, mixing with seawater from the fire hoses still trained on burning sections of the superstructure. Carpenter, still at his post on the bridge, despite a shell splinter in his thigh, ordered the grappling hooks released. Some had to be cut with axes when the release mechanisms jammed. Daffodil, the faithful ferry that had held Vindictive against the Mull for over an hour, reversed her engines. The cruiser began to pull away, her hull grinding against the concrete one final time. Shells burst around Vindictive as she gathered speed, limping away from the Mull at barely 8 knots. Her engine room was partially flooded, one boiler destroyed, the rudder responding sluggishly. A shell struck the aft deck, detonating among the wounded laid out there. The carnage was indescribable. Another hit the forward funnel, bringing it down in a cascade of twisted metal and sparks. Iris, attempting to cover Vindictive's withdrawal, took a direct hit to her bridge, killing her captain and most of the command crew. She fell behind, on fire and listing, her crew fighting to keep her afloat. The destroyer North Star raced in at 30 knots, laying smoke to cover the withdrawal. Her guns firing continuously at the Mull. She took 3 hits in quick succession but maintained speed, weaving between the water spouts of near misses. Other destroyers followed, creating a screen between the retreating assault force and the German batteries. Motor launches darted through the chaos, searching for survivors in the water. Men blown off gangways, thrown from ships from explosions, or who had jumped from burning vessels. In the water, oil from ruptured fuel tanks spread in a black slick, some of it on fire. Men swam through patches of flame, their uniforms smouldering. The cold of the North Sea killed as effectively as German guns. Men who had survived the assault succumbed to the hypothermia within minutes of entering the water. Rescue boats pulled bodies from the sea that showed no wounds, faces peaceful, killed by the cold alone. The blockship crews were scattered across miles of water. Some motor launches had waited too long for survivors and were caught by dawn light, easy targets for German coastal batteries. The return journey became a test of endurance. Vindictive could barely maintain steerage way, her pumps fighting to keep pace with the flooding. Wounded men died quickly in the sick bay as medical supplies ran out. The deck crew worked continuously plugging holes with hammocks and timber, shoring up bulkheads that threatened to collapse. Below, engineers stood knee-deep in oily water, nursing the remaining boilers, knowing that if they failed, German destroyers could catch them before they reached Dover. At 800 hours, the cliffs of Dover appeared through the morning haze. Crowds had gathered, word of the raid having reached the port. As Vindictive limped into harbour, her battle damage clearly visible, her funnel shot away, her hull punctured by dozens of holes, her deck black with blood and fire damage, the crowd stood silent. This was not a triumphant return. The butcher's bill was staggering. Of the 1,784 men who had participated in the direct assault, 227 were dead, 356 wounded, and 19 missing, presumed drowned or captured. Vindictive alone had suffered 160 casualties. The Royal Marines had lost 60% of their attacking force. Among the dead were 3 of the 4 officers who had led the assault on the Mull. Initial reports claimed complete success. The Admiralty announced that the canal had been completely blocked, the submarine menace from Zeebrugge eliminated. Newspapers ran headlines declaring a new chapter in naval warfare, comparing the raid to Drake's attack on Cadiz. King George V visited the wounded in hospital and Victoria Crosses were announced, 8 in total. the most ever awarded for a single naval action. But in Zeebrugge, German engineers were already at work. Within 3 weeks, they had dredged a channel around the sunken block ships sufficient for submarines to pass at high tide. The larger U-boats remained trapped, but smaller coastal submarines could still slip through. By June, the Germans had widened the channel enough for normal operations to resume. The viaduct was repaired within weeks using prefabricated sections. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed what the Admiralty didn't want to acknowledge. Zeebrugge remained operational. Yet the raid's impact transcended its tactical results. In Germany, the audacity of the attack caused genuine alarm. If the British could strike at Zeebrugge, what else might they attempt? Resources were diverted to strengthen coastal defensive across occupied Belgium and the German coast. U-boat crews, previously confident in their Belgian base's security, now wondered if they were truly safe anywhere. In Britain, the raid provided a desperately needed morale boost at the war's darkest hour. After years of grinding attrition, here was an action of the old style. Bold, direct, heroic. The image of Royal Marines storming a fortified position from the sea captured public imagination. Recruitment surged. War bonds sold out. The raid's veterans were treated as heroes, paraded through cities, their accounts published in newspapers. The survivors told different stories in private. They spoke of the gangway slippery with blood and brain matter, of leaving wounded comrades to die, of the strange calm that descended when they accepted death as inevitable. Some couldn't speak at all. Captain Carpenter, awarded the Victoria Cross, suffered nightmares for the rest of his life. Always the same dream, trying to steer Vindictive away from the mole, but the wheel wouldn't respond. Condemned to repeat the approach endlessly. Lieutenant Richard Sanford, who had commanded C3, received his Victoria Cross in a hospital bed, his body riddled with machine gun wounds sustained during the escape. He would survive, but never fully recover, dying in 1920 at age 29, his death hastened by his injuries. Commander Arthur Harrison's Victoria Cross was posthumous. His body never recovered from the waters beneath the mole. The Zeebrugge Raid became a template for future amphibious operations. Military planners studied every aspect, what worked, what failed, what might be done differently. The concept of specialized assault ships with dedicated landing equipment would evolve into the landing craft of World War II. The integration of diversionary attacks with main objectives became standard doctrine. The use of obsolete vessels as block ships would be repeated, most notably at Normandy, where old ships were sunk to create artificial harbours. The raid also demonstrated the limitations of static fortifications against determined assault. The Germans had considered the mole impregnable, yet British forces had successfully boarded it, however briefly and at whatever cost. This lesson would influence both defensive and offensive planning in future conflicts. The concept of special forces, trained for specific high-risk missions, could trace part of its lineage to the volunteers who stormed the mole. But perhaps the raid's most lasting legacy was psychological. It proved that in an age of industrial warfare, individual courage still mattered, that volunteers would knowingly accept near certain death for a strategic objective, that the human element, determination, sacrifice, ingenuity could sometimes overcome technological superiority and prepared defences. Today the mole at Zeebrugge still stands, converted to peaceful use, part of a modern commercial port. On calm days, when the light is right, you can still see the scars in the concrete where shells struck during that April night in 1918. Beneath the waters of the canal entrance, buried beneath a century of silt, lie pieces of the block ships, fragments of steel that once formed the hulls of Thetis, Intrepid, and Iphigenia. The raid on Zeebrugge remains one of the most audacious operations in naval history, not because it achieved its strategic objectives, which it only partially did, but because it represented something larger, the willingness of ordinary men to attempt the extraordinary, to accept the impossible odds, to storm a fortress from the sea in the full knowledge that survival was unlikely. in an age where warfare had become increasingly remote and technological. The images of Marines crossing those flame-lit gangways, advancing into certain death for a chance at victory, retains its power to inspire and appall in equal measure. The last survivor of the raid, stoker William Bourke, died in 1987 at the age of 93. With his passing, the Zeebrugge Raid passed from living memory into history. But on every April 23rd, St George's Day, a ceremony is still held at the Zeebrugge Memorial in Dover. Wreaths are laid, the names are read, and for a moment, those who gather there can almost hear it. The sound of engines in the darkness, the crash of shells, the grinding of steel against stone, and the echo of footsteps on a gangway swaying 30 feet above the black waters of the North Sea. Well then, there you have it. If you've watched this far and like what you've heard, then consider liking and subscribing. Also, you can hit the notification bell if you want to be notified of future stories. I release a new one every Sunday. As a new channel, this really helps not only push these stories in front of more of you lovely people, but helps reassure me I'm not just sending these off into the ether, never to be seen again. If you've listened this far and don't like what you've heard, then, what on earth are you doing? Right then, off you pop. Thanks for listening.